Dear Gordon, ladies and gentlemen, do we need regulation of the digital platform? A EU approach. That's what I would like to comment today. Our reflection are concerning very large online intermediaries and platforms. For examples, online marketplace as Amazon, social networks as Facebook, content sharing platforms, YouTube, app stores, and online travel and accommodation platforms. By very large platforms, EU Commission means companies which own more than 10% of the market. Their role as gatekeeper with a systemic role or function as bottleneck between business and consumer for important digital service justify, to our opinion, regulatory initiatives from our EU public authorities. The ubiquity of their presence in our daily life, the fact that they are more and more present in different sectors of activities through aggressive acquisition of startups and the unprecedented volume of data they are collecting and processing at our AI age, definitively are raising risk to our individual liberties. For instance, they are able, from our surveying, to determine our age, our disease, our political opinions, and our consumers' habits. These risks are more or less well covered by our EU data protection legislation, which I recall is applicable to non-EU platforms targeting EU citizens. But these risks are not the only risk. I would like to pinpoint other risks today badly, legally protected. First, the risk to collectivities. For instance, by profiling people from a certain district or with the same genetic background, you might exclude that part of population from the access to certain services who suspect them of infringement. Second, last but not least, I would like to mention threats to societal interest, threats to environment by abusive consumption of energy, or threats to democracy, as illustrated by the recent Cambridge Analytica case. Very large platforms are creating what the EU Commission draft regulation, the Digital Service Act, is called systemic risk. I quote the explanatory memorandum. Very large online platforms are used in a way that strongly influence safety online, the shaping of public opinion and discourse, as well as on online trade. The way they design the services is generally optimized to benefit their often advertising-driven business models and can cause societal concern. In the absence of effective regulation and enforcement, they can set the rules of the game without effectively identifying and mitigating the risk and the societal and economic harm they can cause. Very large online platforms should therefore assess the systemic risk stemming from the functioning and use of their services, as well as the potential misuse by the recipient of the services, and take appropriate mitigating resource. The idea of social responsibility of the platforms and their obligation to assess their system and their impact definitively is asserted by the EU authorities. My next slide is illustrating both the importance of certain actors on the market and their rapid expansion to new markets. I come directly to the third slide, how to regulate these platforms and which justification for this regulation. I pinpoint three domains. The first one, intends to show how, as regards the problem of disinformation, EU authorities have progressively imposed what I call a descending co-regulation instead of a self-regulation or ascending regulation. The second focuses on the nascent regulation on competition. And finally, third point, I will suggest to justify the very large platforms regulation by the fact that they are delivering universal services. As regards the problem of disinformation caused by the algorithm of recommendation systems developed and used by the platforms, the first approach present with the 2018 Code of Practice on Disinformation was to give the responsibility to the platform themselves and just to ensure a certain transparency of their initiative. That is what we might call an ascending co-regulation, where the public have not the leadership as regards the drafting of the rules and their effectiveness. This approach was a failure, since the code adopted by the platform enact only very weak principles without real effectiveness of these principles. The second, more recent approach, what I call the descending co-regulation of disinformation, is illustrated by the dominant role of the public authorities, imposing not only legislative obligation to very large platforms, notably to inform users about their practice, to make recourse to a third-party audit as regards their AI recommendation systems, and to set up a system of alert and of recourse in case of suspected disinformation. The EU Commission had also issued last year what they have called the guidance to strengthen the code of practice on disinformation. As said by the EU Commission, a new, stronger code is necessary as we need online platforms and other players to address the systemic risk of their services and algorithmic amplification, stop policing themselves alone, and stop allowing to make money on disinformation while fully preserving the freedom of speech. The second point proposed is the legislative trend to increase the public authorities' position in order to limit the leadership of the very large platform, including their political influence on our democracy. Streaming reflection on that issue. First, the need to have a better taxation model founded on the place of the richness creation, and that according with the OECD model. Second, the need to have interoperability, international standardization measures to prevent making professional or private customers captive to certain operators. Need, third point, to apply competition rules taking into account the transversal value of information, and that against the traditional sectoral approach. According to this last point, the EU Commission has issued a draft regulation on competition specific to the digital market. This regulation adopts an asymmetric regulation, stricter for very large platforms than for other companies, and that with three objectives. Ensure contestability of digital markets, which means that markets should remain open to new entrants and innovators. Guarantee fairness in the B2B relationship between digital gatekeepers and their business user. It means a balance between the rights and obligations of each party and the absence of a disproportionate advantage in favor of the digital gatekeepers. See, on that issue, I quote notably the problem of ranking. And finally, strengthen the internal market by creating a certain number of EU champions. Last point, a more personal reflection. Why not to apply the concept of universal service to certain services offered in monopolistic or oligopolistic situation by very large platforms? Historically, this concept has been developed within a liberalized sector, especially the telecommunication, but also the postal ones, in order to oblige certain companies providing services considered as essential for the population or to the market to offer these services at fixed condition of price and quality in order to guarantee the accessibility to these services to everybody without discrimination. At my opinion, this concept should be used as regards certain services offered by the platform. Indeed, certain services offered by very large platforms, social media, information media, might be considered as essential service in our digital world. See, notably, the notion of core platform service, the CPS, I mean search engines, social networks, video sharing, interpersonal communication services, cloud computing services, operating system, and advertising services. The regulation should be available only for gatekeeper through an asymmetric legislation. 3 criteria are proposed in that way for defining these gatekeepers. They must have a significant impact on the market. They must play a role of gateway between business and individuals. And finally, they must have an entrenched and durable position. This regulation must be founded on legitimate reason. For instance, the fight against disinformation, the limits as regards the profiling, the anti-competitive or discriminatory practice, and must be strictly proportionate and limited for the achievement of this objective. I would like to conclude. We need a regulation of digital platform if we want to keep a living democratic society respecting social justice imperatives. Thanks for your attention.